My fellow Americans, we have a crisis on our hands, a border crisis, and I am angry. Just not for the reasons you might expect. Let's talk about immigration. Welcome to Swing Voter Central. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Swing Voter Central. Today we're talking about immigration, and you're probably expecting me to spend the next 30 minutes talking about this. This famous chart represents the mass migration of immigrants coming to our border under the Biden administration. Our nation has never seen a crisis like this, and if you look even further back in time, the numbers have been pretty consistently low up until one defining moment, the 2020 election. And you might be asking yourself, how? Why? What happened here that caused this mass migration that inundated our border, overwhelmed our border security, and caused thousands of deaths? Well, the answer is actually more simple than you might think. The answer is in the way that the politics were played.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
To put it simply, he offered hope. Hope for millions and millions of people who believed that if they showed up at the American border, they would be able to achieve the American dream. And show up they did. 11 million undocumented migrants showed up at the US border under the Biden administration. The only problem with that is that we were not equipped to receive them. At this very moment, millions of people are stuck at the border in a system that is broken and unable to process them. And if you're like me, you took one look at this chart and were mind blown, to say the least. You probably have a lot of questions. So did I, and I'm here to answer those questions. Before we get started, I want to swipe some misinformation off the table. I want to get some facts out of the way so that we can lay this to rest once and for all, because this show is mostly about unbiased information. So if you're here for the basic statistics, we can get that right off the table. Let's take a look at some information that I pulled from our government website. In summary, illegal immigrants are a net fiscal drain, meaning that they receive more in government services than they pay in taxes. This result is not due to laziness or fraud. And as a matter of fact, illegal immigrants actually have a higher rate of work. They are some of the hardest working people in America. And they do pay some taxes, including income and payroll taxes. The fundamental reason that illegal immigrants are a net drain is that they have a low average education level, which results in low average earnings and tax payments. It also means that a large share qualify for welfare programs, often receiving benefits on behalf of their US-born children. The tax payments of illegal immigrants do not come close to covering the cost they create. So there you have it. Those are the economics, written in black and white on our own government website. Now, does that mean we should not be taking in immigrants from underprivileged countries? No. That just means we need to do it systematically and we need to do it correctly. And when we have a sudden influx of 11 million illegal immigrants, our systems become inundated. What that means is we not only lose the ability to take care of American citizens, but it actually becomes extremely difficult to provide services and healthcare to the illegal immigrants themselves. What that means to me is that these people are showing up to the United States under a false promise of security, of healthcare, of housing, all promises that were made by President Joe Biden. Now, I don't necessarily disagree with Joe Biden. I think that America is a big, wonderful country, and all first world countries are currently taking in refugees from around the world. And I think that we should be no different as long as it is done systematically, as long as it is done correctly, as long as it is done in a way that we can handle the processing of said immigrants and we can handle the provision of services for said immigrants. When you inundate the system, we lose control. But let's move on to the next fact I'd like to just get off the table before I move on, and that is the issue of migrant crime. I'm going to fix this in 2 seconds, and we're going to move on, and we're never going to talk about it again. According to our government website, US-born citizens had a 1.53% incarceration rate, while unauthorized immigrants had a 0.5% rate. There is no sudden burst and sudden rise in migrant crime. There is no data. I searched for it. I went looking. I was like, is this true? Because I've been watching the Trump rallies and I've been seeing those slideshows of like, this is this guy and he came from Guatemala and he killed this lady and everyone should be scared. That's fear-mongering. And while I do believe that fear-mongering does have a place in this election, I believe that it's being misdirected. I'm here to try and redirect our rage and redirect our concern, because there is a place for fear-mongering. It's just not what you've been told. And as a matter of fact, migrant crime is at an all-time low. So Republicans, when you use this as an argument, you're undermining the actual problems and you're undermining the actual issues. There are problems, there are issues. I agree that we have a crisis. I agree that it needs to be solved. But when we focus on problems that are imaginary, for the most part, I'm not saying that there is no danger associated, that there is no risk associated with allowing millions of people to just walk right in without vetting them first or checking their background, because also according to our government website, 169 non-US citizens from the terrorist watch list were encountered at the US border just in 2023 alone. When terrorists are starting to sneak in through the border, I think we can admit that we have a problem. The problem, however, is not Haitian immigrants eating cats. And when we focus on things like that, we undermine the actual problems. If you call yourself a bleeding heart liberal, you should be incredibly angry and you should be incredibly sad. But I think we're looking in the wrong direction. The vast majority of these people that you see in this crowd are just people who want a better life for themselves and their family. So this type of fear-mongering has to stop. I'm not saying fear-mongering has to stop. I'm just saying the migrant crime and the eating the cats thing, that is hurting the cause more than it is helping it. If you want to get angry, get angry. I'm about to give you a reason to get angry. I'm about to give you a reason to cry. But it's not eating the cats. Or the ducks for that matter, or geese, or whatever that is. What I want to say is that I'm not mad at these people. I'm not mad at them for searching for a better life. I am far more angry at the woman and the man who convinced them that if they dropped everything and gave everything up that they ever knew and they ever owned and showed up at our border, that they were going to get the American dream. When in reality, under the Biden administration, only 15% of asylum seekers were allowed to stay. That means that of these huddled masses you see in these photos of these people flooding to our border and risking their lives to get here, only a small amount of them are allowed to stay, which means that when Biden got up on that stage in 2020 and said, I hope that there's an inundation, I hope there's a mass migration, he was giving people false hope. And that false hope was deadly. Nearly 3,000 migrants have died en route to the US border under the Biden administration. Now, I remember discussing this recently with a friend of mine who was like, only 3,000? Only 3,000. Out of 11 million immigrants, only 3,000 died? That's such a small number. I would have expected it to be higher. What an insignificant number. Okay, nearly the same amount of people died in the Twin Towers on 9/11, but 3,000 brown people from south of the border, that's a tiny number. Okay. Statistically speaking, that is a tiny number. Out of 11 million people, 3,000 is not a big number. It's not a big number. But you know what is a big number? You know what is a big number? This. Non-governmental organizations and human rights groups such as Amnesty International and Doctors Without Borders have reported that a large percentage of women and girls, what does that mean to you? Women and girls have faced sexual violence during their journey through Mexico to the US border. Some studies suggest that as many as 60 to 80% of female migrants experience rape or sexual assault along the way. All because some politician got up on a stage and invited them and said, leave your homes, there's a better life waiting for you on the other side. 15% of those people were allowed to stay. My fellow Americans, welcome to the Darien Gap. This is the most famous route that migrants take on their way to the US border, and it is crawling with cartel members, waiting in the shadows of the trees to rob and rape and kill and take advantage of these desperate people. The vast majority of people who pass through this gap will encounter a cartel member who will stop them and demand money. Millions of dollars have been stolen from these desperate people over the last 4 years, and if they can't pay up, they pay in blood. And in the case of many women and girls, they pay with their bodies. Not willingly. According to the Missing Migrants Project, an international organization that tracks migrants around the world, 9,824 missing migrants have been reported on their way to the US border since 2014. But I realize that reading numbers and statistics is impersonal. So I'm going to personalize what I'm telling you. I'm going to humanize my words by allowing a human to tell you all about it. I'm going to give a voice to one of these women so you can understand what happens when a politician inspires these people to pack up everything that they own and travel into the Darien Gap. This is what happens.
Y luego seleccionaban a las mujeres, las apuntaban y decían, pasa para allá que te voy a revisar. Y te voy a revisar era que quítate la ropa. Y yo simplemente me alcé la camisa y me bajé el pantalón hasta acá, y me apuntó y me dijo, te dije que te quitaras todo. Y yo, ¿pero qué estás buscando? O sea, no tengo nada. Me revisaron el cabello y me quiso meter la mano y yo me eché para atrás y le dije, ¿pero qué buscas? No, que tu plata, ¿de dónde? Si te dije que soy venezolana. Y bueno, efectivamente eso no le importó y me dijo, como no traes dinero vas a pagar de otra forma. Y bueno, ya después salimos de allí, me sentó aparte y abusaron como de 3 personas más. Ya después nos dijeron recojan sus cosas y se van.
According to Amnesty International, it is estimated that 20,000 migrants are kidnapped each year and held for ransom. You voted for that. I voted for that. I watched Joe Biden on that stage and I heard him say that he hopes these people travel to the border, and I clapped for him. I said, yes, Joe Biden is humanitarian. Many migrants, especially from Central America, travel on top of freight trains. Falling from the moving trains leads to severe injuries or, of course, death. And gangs controlling these routes extort money from migrants, sometimes pushing those who can't pay off the train. Migrants, especially those crossing through the Darien Gap, are regularly robbed by criminals, losing what little they have left. They are often left without food, shelter, or the means to continue their journey. We should be looking towards the humanitarian crisis that was created by rhetoric from the Biden administration that led these people to believe that if they lost everything to come to America, that the dream would be waiting for them on the other side. Which is why when Kamala Harris posted this on her Instagram the other day, I lost my frickin' mind.
A comprehensive, earned pathway to citizenship for hardworking people. And it was not taken up. And now we look at a situation where people are suffering. The reality is that in terms of having access to health care, had your mother been able to gain citizenship, she would have been entitled to health care that may have alleviated her suffering and yours.
What I gather is that this young woman had parents who were illegal immigrants, and her father was able to make it and become a citizen while her mother was not. And when her mother needed life-saving health care, she did not have access because she was illegal. And that is a heartbreaking story. But if Kamala Harris was a responsible politician who truly cared about this crisis, she would not have platformed that exchange. Because what that exchange tells people watching this from South and Central America is, oh, if Kamala Harris wins, we can get healthcare in America. Pack your bags, Grandma, pack your bags. We're gonna go get healthcare in America. That's what Kamala Harris is saying. She's saying, if you elect me, I will make sure that illegal immigrants have access to healthcare. And while that is not a bad thing, from a humanitarian perspective, that is a good thing. But it is not humanitarian to discuss this on a public platform. That is irresponsible. If I were a politician, if I were Kamala Harris, I would give that woman a voice. I would talk to her backstage. I would say, that is a horrific story. Let's have a seat. Let's sit down together after the town hall and let's talk about this problem so that if I am elected, I can address this issue. But it is irresponsible. It is morally reprehensible to take this girl's story and turn it into an election advertisement. That's what this was. This was an election bid from Kamala Harris. Vote for me because I'm humanitarian. There is nothing humanitarian about giving hope to millions of people who are probably not going to get in anyway. Because what those people have to face to get here is a humanitarian crisis. It is not responsible to use these specific topics as election issues. The only thing she should be saying right now is, do not risk your life. Do not enter the Darien Gap. Do not come here illegally. It is dangerous, and we cannot accommodate you at this time. Our border is inundated. We do not have the resources. We do not have the people. We do not have the funds to deal with the amount of people that are currently at our border. And by doing what she just did there, she is repeating the mistakes of Joe Biden, which was to give people hope. I know that's your thing, Kamala. I know that's your thing. It's hope. It's hope. Everyone should be so hopeful. And you know what? You're going to get exactly what you asked for. What you did by posting that on your Instagram was giving hope to millions of people who are now going to pack their bags because they think that they're going to get the health care that they need the minute they get here. And you know dang well that this is not achievable within the next couple of years, that this is not something that we can sign an executive order on and fix the problem. We already have a doctor shortage in America. We already have a healthcare system that needs reform. What do you think is going to happen next? What she had done there was irresponsible and it was dangerous, and it is going to put millions of more lives and millions of more women and girls at risk. Kamala's team chose that young woman. They vetted her. They knew what she was going to say before they handed her the microphone. They met her before the show. They found all the people in the audience that wanted to ask questions, and they said, ooh, that one sounds good. That one's going to make people sad. That's going to tug on their heartstrings. Yeah, maybe you did score some votes, Kamala. You had me sitting there with tears in my eyes. I was like, that is so sad. That is so sad. We need a president that's going to care. But then I realized that was selfish. That was selfish and dangerous. If you really cared, you would have sat down with her. You would have talked to her. You would have committed that to memory, that conversation, and you would have put it on your agenda. You would have said, we need to make sure that people have access to healthcare in the United States. But that's not what you did. You politicized her voice. You politicized it, and you gave more people hope. You made them a promise that we cannot keep. You did the same thing that Biden did. I could spend the next several hours showing you horrific photos of parents and their small children floating upside down in a river because they drowned. I could spend the next hour telling you about all the horror stories that border agents have encountered in cartel houses. I could tell you about the thousands of pounds of fentanyl that have come over our border in unprecedented numbers under the Biden administration, but there is just simply not enough time. Look at this chart again. This is what happens when you do irresponsible things on the world stage, because this chart is only going to get worse under that rhetoric. And Democrats, I know what you're thinking. I bet right now you're thinking about that border bill, aren't you? You're sitting there and you're going, hey, but the Democrats tried to fix the border and the Republicans shut it down. What about the border bill? What about the border bill that they tried to pass this year? What about that last minute border bill? Oh, you mean that border bill that included $118 billion worth of funding for foreign wars snuck into the fine print? That bill? The bill that came during the election year just in time for Kamala Harris to add it to her platform after 4 years of doing nothing. Look at this chart again, you guys. We didn't need new border legislation to keep immigration at a low. Look at this chart. This chart represents immigration since the 1970s. Where was the immigration reform back then? Oh, maybe we didn't need it. Did you ever consider that maybe we didn't need it? Did you ever consider for 1 minute that maybe more legislation and more strict and more harsh rules isn't really necessary when every single president before President Biden had control over the border with the exact same policies that already exist? You see, what Republicans would argue is that, yeah, we shut down the border bill because it had billions of dollars of secret funding for foreign wars in it. And also because it just wasn't necessary. It wasn't necessary. We don't need more legislation. We need a president who's able to enforce it. The funniest thing about that bill is not the secret foreign funding, but the fact that it included an infrastructure clause that would continue building Trump's border wall. Remember, Democrats? Do you guys remember in 2020 when we were all like, ha ha ha, build the wall, how stupid. So stupid to build the wall. I was laughing my butt off. I was like, how silly is that? Build the wall. And now here we come with the Democrats. It's 2024, and what's snuck into their little border bill? A little bit of money for that wall. Interesting that, isn't it? And Democrats, if you're thinking, yeah, but one of these people is going to deport way more immigrants than Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris cares about immigrants and Joe Biden cares about these immigrants and they want them to stay. Remember when Joe Biden invited them? Remember when he invited them to the border? This chart represents the number of people that were granted asylum under Donald Trump and under Joe Biden. What does this chart say to you? Let me help you understand it. The green represents the number of people who were approved as asylum seekers. The green represents the number of people who were let in. Interesting. It looks like less people were admitted into the United States under Biden than under Trump. And in many cases, the numbers were exactly the same. And thanks to Kamala Harris standing up on stage and going, I'm going to make this a safe space for illegal immigrants, immigration is not going to slow down. If Kamala Harris wins this election, immigration is going to ramp up, and I can guarantee you on that fact. And we are the United States of America. We are more than capable of accepting refugees. We're more than capable of taking care of them. And I think that based on our power and our fortune, we do have an obligation to seek out the people on this planet who need safety and who need asylum, and we should grant it to them. That's my personal opinion. Not everyone would agree with me. The truth of the matter is, America, that even if we took in as many immigrants as we could possibly sustain, we wouldn't even make a dent in the world poverty rate. We wouldn't be able to take in more than a drop in the ocean of people who are living under the poverty line. To put this into perspective for you, I think it's really important that you pay attention to what I'm going to show you next. And I'm going to close the show with this. This is a famous demonstration by a journalist called Roy Beck.
This gumball represents the 1 million legal immigrants that the United States has taken every year on average since 1990. Now, who in the world deserves our humanitarian compassion? The World Bank has one measure of the desperately poor of the world. They make less than $2 a day. And how many people make less than $2 a day in the world? We'll start with Africa. In Africa alone, there are 650 million people who make less than $2 a day. 650 million. And in India, another 890 million people, desperately poor. China adds another 480 million people, making less than $2 a day. And unfortunately, the rest of Asia has a heartbreaking 810 million people who the World Bank says make less than $2 a day. And finally, there's 105 million of Latin America's population that are desperately poor. All told, the World Bank says there are 3 billion people in the world, 3 billion people who are desperately poor, making less than $2 a day. That's 3,000 gumballs. And every year, we take 1 million and suggest that we've somehow made a humanitarian difference. Of course, we don't pull our immigrants from these desperately poor populations, do we? These people are too poor, too sick, too disconnected to make it here as immigrants. We tend to pull our immigrants out of the better off poor of the world. And Mexico tends to define the type of immigrant that we bring here because the plurality of people come from Mexico. And Mexico is poor. How many people in the world live in countries that have average incomes lower than that of Mexico? And the World Bank tells us that that number is these 3 billion plus another 2.6 billion people. 5.6 billion people in the world who live in countries with average incomes below that of Mexico. That's 5,600 gumballs. And so what is it that the elites are telling us? They're telling us that when we take this 1 million immigrants, that we somehow or another are tackling world poverty. Double our immigration to 2 million a year. We couldn't make a noticeable difference. And we may be really hurting the impoverished people of the world because the 1 million that we do take are among the most energetic, often the better educated, certainly the most dissatisfied people that if they did not immigrate would be the agents for change to improve the lot of all the people in these countries. The true heroes in the global humanitarian field are the people in these countries who have the wherewithal to immigrate to another country, but instead stay in their countries to apply their skills to help their fellow countrymen. Unfortunately, our immigration system tends to entice these very type of people to abandon their countrymen. The impossibility of making even a dent is actually worse than it looks here. Because last year, when we took 1 million immigrants, these countries added, births over deaths, 80 million more people into the impoverished population. And this year, Congress is bringing in 1 million legal immigrants. And this year, according to the United Nations, these countries are expected to add another 80 million people. And next year, you can be quite sure that Congress will bring in another 1 million immigrants. And these countries, unfortunately, will be adding another 80 million people into these impoverished nations. We could take 5 million a year, but we'd never get ahead of what's happening in these countries. Not in this century. Don't you see? Immigration can never be an effective or significant way to deal with the suffering people of the world. They have to be helped where they live. 99.9% of them will never be able to immigrate to a rich country. There's no hope for that. They have to bloom where they're planted. The only place that 99.9% of these people can be helped is where they live. Let's help them there.